The hand that gripped her arm under the table was a familiar weight. It was not the hand of a lover, but of an owner. It was a pressure that said, "Be still, be quiet, be invisible." Mina had learned the precise calibrations of that grip over 7 years. This particular pressure, the thumb digging into the delicate skin just below her elbow, was the warning before the storm. It was the low-pressure system that signaled the impending hurricane of his ego. She did not flinch. She had trained her body not to react, to absorb the small violences as a seawall absorbs the relentless slap of the tide. Tonight, the tide was high. The grand ballroom of the Corinthian Hotel was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in ivory linen, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. It was the annual Vanguard Architecture Awards, the pinnacle of their shared profession. Or rather, his profession. Tonight, he was Marcus Thorne, the visionary. She was the woman in the emerald gown, an accessory chosen to complement his tie. A beautiful, silent, supporting structure. It was a role she had played for so long, the lines had bled into her own skin. Marcus was accepting the award for the Helios Tower, a skyscraper that scraped the clouds with a grace that was not his. The design was hers. It had been born on her tablet during a sleepless 3-week fugue state, fueled by black coffee and the desperate need to create something that could not be diminished by his moods. She had sketched the twisting spine of the building, the way it caught the morning light, the delicate lattice of its facade that was both strong and ethereal. She had solved the impossible engineering problems, the ones he had thrown at her desk with a dismissive wave, saying, "Fix it." And she had. She always did. He had taken the files, changed the name on the title block, and presented it as his own. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version where she was grateful for the scraps of his approval. That version of her had expired 2 months ago, in the sterile silence of a hospital emergency room after she had walked into a door for the 3rd and final time. She had made a plan then, a quiet, methodical, architectural plan for her own escape. "You look tense," Marcus murmured, his voice a low caress that was for public consumption only. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were busy scanning the room, counting the important faces, assessing his own rising stock. "Smile, Mina. People are watching. They'll think you're not proud of me." She did not smile. She turned her head and looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time all evening. The face she had once thought was handsome now seemed assembled from spare parts. The charming smile was a muscular tic. The confident gaze was a performance of security he did not possess. He was a hollow structure, a facade with nothing behind it, and she had been the load-bearing wall holding it all up. "I am tired, Marcus," she said, her voice so low it was a vibration against the tablecloth. His grip tightened. The warning. "Don't start, not tonight. Tonight is my night. My night. My award. My design." The possessive pronouns were the bricks of the prison he had built around her. Her plan was simple. She would endure this evening. She would sit and watch him accept praise for her work. Then she would go home, to the apartment they shared, and she would pack the single bag she had hidden in the back of her closet. She had a new apartment leased under her maiden name, a new bank account he couldn't touch. She would disappear from his life as quietly as she had lived within it. At their table sat the client, the man whose vision and, more importantly, whose money had brought the Helios Tower to life, Chairman Kwon Jin-woo. He was a man who seemed to exist in a different state of matter from everyone else in the room. While others buzzed with nervous energy, he was a point of absolute stillness. He wore a charcoal suit of such perfect tailoring it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He had not spoken much all evening, observing the proceedings with an unnerving placidity. His presence was a kind of silence that didn't echo, the kind that settles. Mina had only met him a few times, always with Marcus who did all the talking, positioning her as his brilliant but shy assistant. Chairman Kwan's eyes, dark and intelligent, were the only ones that had ever made her feel seen, rather than just looked at. It was a disquieting feeling, and one she had quickly learned to ignore. The presenter on stage was gushing, a testament to bold, uncompromising vision, a new landmark for our city, the masterwork of a true genius, Marcus Thorne. The room erupted in applause. Marcus squeezed her arm one last time, a final assertion of ownership before releasing her. He stood, basking in the light. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, shot his cuffs, and strode toward the stage, a conquering hero. Mina watched him go, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She felt the eyes of the table on her, the sympathetic, pitying glances of the other partners' wives. She was the woman behind the man, and they all knew the geography of that particular shadow. But Chairman Kwan was not looking at Marcus. He was looking at her. His gaze was not pitying. It was analytical. It was as if he were examining the stress points on a blueprint, searching for the flaw in the design. Marcus accepted the heavy sculptural award. He held it up to the light. Thank you, he began, his voice booming with false humility. An architect is nothing without his team, and I have the best. He paused for effect. But vision must come from one place, a single driving force. He went on, a long, rambling speech about his journey, his struggles, his singular genius. He never mentioned her name. She had not expected him to. It was not part of their arrangement, the one he had dictated and she had silently accepted. When he returned to the table, flushed with victory, he placed the award in the center, a golden idol for them all to worship. To me, he said, raising his champagne flute. The others at the table dutifully raised their glasses. Mina did not. Her hands remained in her lap. Marcus's smile tightened. Mina, a toast. It was not a request. No, she said. The word was small, but it landed in the space between them with the force of a wrecking ball. The polite chatter at the table faltered. Marcus's face, a mask of genial triumph moments before, began to crumble. A dark flush crept up his neck. What did you say? I said no. She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. The fear she had lived with for years was still there, a cold ghost in her veins, but for the first time it was smaller than her resolve. I will not toast you for work you did not do. A collective, sharp intake of breath seemed to suck the air from their immediate vicinity. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. This was not part of the program. The supporting actress was going off script. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable life. You are nothing without me. You sit at this table because of me. You don't even belong here. He gestured around at the assembled power brokers and industry titans. She's just my assistant, he said, his voice rising slightly, a performative aside to the rest of the table, an attempt to frame her as hysterical, ungrateful, a little overwhelmed by it all. It was then that the first sound broke the spell. It was not a loud sound. It was the quiet, deliberate clink of a heavy crystal glass being placed on a linen tablecloth. Every head turned. Chairman Kwon Jin-woo had set down his glass. He had not been looking at Marcus. He had been watching Mina, his expression unreadable. Now, he slowly folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood up. He was not a large man, but his presence seemed to warp the space around him, drawing all light and attention. The ambient noise of the entire ballroom seemed to dim, as if someone had slowly turned down the volume on the world. He did not rush. He was not performing. The movement was economical, precise, and final. He looked down at Marcus, who was still half risen from his chair, his face a mask of confusion and rage. The chairman's gaze was flat, cold, and utterly unimpressed. It was the look of a man examining an insect he was about to crush. She doesn't belong at this table, Chairman Kwan said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. He repeated Marcus's own words, but they sounded different in his mouth. They were not an insult. They were a statement of fact, but with a meaning Marcus could not yet comprehend. Marcus blinked, momentarily disarmed. He thought he had found an ally. Exactly, Chairman. Thank you. She's getting emotional. Chairman Kwan's eyes flickered to Mina for a fraction of a second. It was a glance of confirmation. Then his gaze returned to Marcus, and the coldness intensified. She does not belong at this table, he repeated, because this is a table for collaborators and partners, not for thieves. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a guillotine's blade. Thief. Marcus paled. I don't know what you mean. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? The chairman's voice never rose. It did not need to. His power was not in volume, but in weight. My legal team has been reviewing the provenance of the Helios Tower design for the past 2 months. We do a thorough due diligence on all our partners, Mr. Thorne. We found the original design files, the metadata, the emails from you to her with notes like, refine this and solve this. The architectural signature is hers, consistent across a dozen smaller, uncredited projects. Your signature, by contrast, is inconsistent. It is the work of a committee, or rather, the work of the people you've stolen from. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Marcus's career. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The swagger, the performative confidence, it all evaporated under the cold, factual light of the chairman's quiet indictment. He looked like a cheap suit that had been left out in the rain. Chairman Kwan gestured almost imperceptibly with his head. 2 men, who had been standing unnoticed by the ballroom doors, began to move. They wore the same dark, impeccably tailored suits as the chairman. They moved without wasted motion, their purpose clear and undeniable. You have defrauded my company, the chairman continued, his voice still level, almost conversational. You have accepted an award under false pretenses, and you have abused the single most valuable asset on your team. He looked at Mina again, and this time his expression was not unreadable. It held a profound, startling respect. Miss An Mina is the architect of the Helios Tower. She is the reason we are sitting here tonight. She belongs exactly where she is. He paused, letting the truth settle over the now completely silent table. Then his gaze fell back on Marcus, and it was utterly devoid of any emotion at all. You, however, do not. The 2 men arrived at the table. They did not touch Marcus. They simply stood behind his chair, their presence an absolute and non-negotiable fact. One of them leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was, it drained the last of the blood from Marcus's face. He looked at Mina, his eyes wide with a panicked, pleading terror she had never seen before. It was the look of a cornered animal. Not because he was sorry, because he was caught. He stood up, clumsy and uncoordinated. The award, his golden idol, teetered on the table. He reached for it, a desperate, reflexive gesture. Leave it, Chairman Kwan said. The command was soft, but it cracked through the air like a whip. Marcus's hand froze. He looked from the award to the chairman, and then to Mina. He opened his mouth, but the man behind him placed a quiet hand on his shoulder. It was not a violent gesture, but it was immovable. Marcus sagged. The fight went out of him completely. He was escorted away from the table, a ghost leaving his own feast. The 2 men guided him through the stunned crowd, which parted for them as if they were lepers. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It pressed in on Mina from all sides. The eyes of the room were on her now, but the pity was gone, replaced by a stunned, hungry curiosity. She felt exposed, stripped bare. Her carefully constructed plan for a quiet escape had been detonated, replaced by this public spectacle, this demolition. She looked at Chairman Kwan, who was still standing. He looked back at her, his expression calm. He had just systematically destroyed a man's life in under 3 minutes, with no more apparent effort than ordering a cup of coffee. Miss An, he said, his voice now gentle. May I escort you somewhere a little quieter? She could only nod. The strength that had sustained her through the confrontation was gone, leaving a hollow, trembling space in its place. She felt his hand, warm and steady, on the small of her back. It was not a possessive grip. It was a supportive one. He guided her away from the table, away from the whispers and the stares, leaving the golden award sitting alone in the center of the table, a monument to a lie. He led her not out of the ballroom, but through a side door she had never noticed, into a quiet, private corridor. The muffled sounds of the gala faded behind them. Here, the air was cool and still. He stopped, turning to face her, but kept a respectful distance. He did not crowd her. He gave her space to breathe. "Are you all right, Miss An?" he asked. She leaned against the cool marble wall, the emerald silk of her dress a stark contrast to the pale stone. "I don't know what I am," she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. You knew." "I suspected," he corrected gently. "I hired the best architectural firm, but the man I met did not speak the same language as the blueprints. The blueprints were poetry. He spoke in prose, so I had my people look deeper. We found you, Miss An. We found the poet." He paused. "I have been waiting for you to find your own voice." Mina closed her eyes. It was too much. The validation she had craved for years, delivered by a man who moved with the quiet lethality of a panther. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all that?" "Because I do not invest in facades, Miss An. I invest in foundations. The foundation of the Helios Tower is your work. It is brilliant. It is honest. The man who claimed it was neither." He looked at her, and his dark eyes were serious. "My company owns the firm of Thorne and Associates. As of 8 o'clock this morning, it was renamed the An Mina Collective. You are the sole principal. Your former colleagues who were loyal to you have already been contacted and have accepted positions. Your office is on the 74th floor of the Helios Tower. Marcus Thorne's belongings have been removed." Mina's head spun. This was not protection. This was a tectonic shift. He had not just saved her from an embarrassing scene. He had rewritten her entire reality. He had handed her the kingdom she had built but had never been allowed to rule. I don't understand," she stammered. "It is simple," he said, his voice patient, as if explaining a simple equation. "I wanted to work with the true architect of the Helios Tower. Now I can." He produced a sleek black business card from his inner pocket. It bore a single name, Kwon Jin-woo, and a private number. "My car is waiting downstairs. It will take you wherever you need to go. Your new apartment, perhaps? The keys indeed are in a packet with the driver. When you are ready, call me. We have other projects to discuss." He did not wait for an answer. He gave a slight, formal bow of his head, a gesture of profound respect, and then turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving her alone in the silent corridor with the world tilted on a new and terrifying axis. She looked down at the card in her hand. It felt impossibly heavy, the weight of a life she had never dared to imagine. The kind of life that belonged to her. The car was exactly as he'd said, a black, impossibly sleek sedan with tinted windows, waiting at a private exit. The driver, a stern-faced man in a dark suit, opened the door for her without a word. Inside, the world was silent. The leather seats were cool against her skin. On the seat beside her was a thick manila envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were a set of keys, a deed to a condominium in a building she recognized as one of the most exclusive in the city, and a credit card in the name of An Mina. There was also a single sheet of paper, a letter of incorporation for the An Mina Collective. She gave the driver the address. It felt like speaking a foreign language. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the Corinthian Hotel, a glittering palace where her old life had been publicly executed. She did not feel triumph. She felt a profound, disorienting emptiness. She had been fighting to escape a cage for so long, she had no idea what to do with the open sky. The apartment was breathtaking. It was a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city she had helped to shape. The Helios Tower stood prominent in the skyline, its twisting spine catching the moonlight. Her building, her signature, written in steel and glass against the night. The space was sparsely furnished with elegant minimalist pieces. It was beautiful, but it was not hers. It was a perfectly designed set for a life she hadn't chosen. For the first week, Mina moved through the apartment like a ghost. She slept in the enormous bed, showered in the marble-clad bathroom, and ate takeout food at the vast, empty dining table. She didn't unpack the single bag she had brought with her. It sat by the door, a relic of a different escape plan, a more modest one. She was free, but she felt untethered. The quiet strength that had defined her was a tool for endurance, not for peace. She didn't know how to live without the weight she had been carrying. She thought about Chairman Kwan. She thought about his quiet confidence, the way he had dismantled Marcus with a few calm sentences. He had not done it for her, not really. He had done it because Marcus was an impurity in his system, a faulty component in a machine he expected to run perfectly. She was simply the correct component that had been mislabeled. It was business. It had to be. To think otherwise was to trade one cage for another, gilded though it may be. She spent hours online, researching him. Kwon Jin-woo was the chairman of the Daesung Group, a sprawling conglomerate with interests in construction, technology, and global logistics. His official biography was sparse. He had taken over the company from his father and expanded its reach exponentially. He was known for his ruthlessness in business and his complete privacy. There were few photos of him. Tabloid articles whispered of connections to the old families, the kind of power that operated in the shadows, far from the light of boardrooms. They called him the Silent King, a man whose influence was felt everywhere, but who was rarely seen. The articles painted a picture of a man who did not tolerate mistakes, imperfections, or deceit. By taking credit for her work, Marcus had not just wronged her. He had presented a flawed product to a man who demanded perfection. Chairman Kwan's intervention had not been an act of chivalry. It had been an act of quality control. This realization was both chilling and, strangely, comforting. It meant she owed him nothing more than the professional excellence he had already paid for. On the 8th day, she woke up and knew the haunting was over. She unpacked her bag. She went out and bought groceries, art supplies, and thick, soft towels. She filled the silent, perfect apartment with the small, messy details of her own life. She rearranged the furniture. She set up a drafting table by the window with the best view of the Helios Tower. And then, when the space finally felt like it belonged to her, she picked up the black business card and dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. Miss On. His voice was the same, a calm baritone. There was no surprise, no impatience. It was as if he had been sitting by the phone, simply waiting. Chairman Kwan, she said, her own voice steadier than she expected. I am ready to work. Excellent, he replied. My car will be there in 20 minutes. The headquarters of the Daesung Group was a skyscraper even more impressive than the Helios Tower. It was a sheer cliff of black glass and steel, a monument to quiet, unassailable power. She was met in the lobby by a severe-looking woman with a sharp haircut and an earpiece who introduced herself as Ms. Choi, the chairman's executive assistant. Ms. Choi led her to a private elevator that shot them directly to the penthouse floor. The office was less an office and more a command center. One entire wall was a window overlooking the city. The other walls were lined with books and ancient pottery. In the center was a single massive desk made of a dark, polished wood. Kwon Jin-woo was not sitting behind it. He was standing by the window, looking out. He turned as she entered. He was dressed in a dark blue suit, and he looked less like a businessman and more like a general surveying his territory. Miss On, he said, gesturing to a seating area with 2 low sofas and a table. Welcome. Thank you for seeing me, Chairman. Jin-woo, he corrected her. We are partners now, please. She sat, perching on the edge of the sofa. He sat opposite her. He did not lean back. He sat with a perfect, straight posture that bespoke immense self-control. Ms. Choi entered silently and placed a tea service on the table before disappearing again. I wanted to thank you, Mina began, for everything. The firm, the apartment. It was more than I ever could have expected. It was what you had earned, he said simply, pouring the tea with a steady hand. I merely corrected a clerical error. He handed her a cup. His fingers brushed against hers for a fraction of a second. It was like touching a live wire. Now, he said, changing the subject, let's talk about the Black Swan Project. For the next 2 hours, he laid out his vision. It was a cultural center, a sprawling complex of museums, theaters, and parks on a neglected stretch of the city's waterfront. It was audacious, impossibly ambitious, and breathtakingly beautiful. He spoke of it with a quiet passion that transformed his severe features. This was not just another investment for him. This was a legacy. "Why me?" she asked when he was finished. "There are 100 starch-architects who would kill for this commission." "Because they would build a monument to themselves," he answered without hesitation. "You build for the light. You build for the people who will use the space. I saw it in the Helios Tower. It is strong, but it is not aggressive. It is complex, but it is not complicated. It has grace. That is what I want for this project." And so their partnership began. It was a strange, formal dance. They met 3 times a week in his office. She would present her sketches and models, and he would study them in silence, his focus absolute. His critiques were incisive, brilliant, and always impersonal. He saw things no one else did: the flow of foot traffic, the play of shadows at a certain time of day, the emotional resonance of a particular building material. He was not an architect, but he understood the soul of a building in a way that humbled her. She threw herself into the work. It was a lifeline. For the first time, her creativity was not a secret to be hidden, but a resource to be celebrated. She hired the best young architects, the ones who, like her, had been overlooked by the big firms. The Anmina Collective became a hub of vibrant, innovative energy. They worked long, grueling hours, but it was joyful work. It was work that was building something real. Her relationship with Jinwoo remained strictly professional, yet an unspoken intimacy grew between them. It was built in the shared silence as they studied a blueprint, in the flicker of understanding in his eyes when she explained a difficult concept, in the rare, small smile he gave her when she solved a particularly vexing problem. He learned that she drank her coffee black with 1 sugar. She learned that he had a deep love for classical music, which always played softly in his office. They learned the rhythm of each other's minds. One evening, working late, he found her staring out the window at the Helios Tower. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "To see it, knowing what it cost you?" "It doesn't belong to him anymore," she said. "It doesn't belong to me either. A building belongs to the city, to the people who look at it every day. I just gave it a start." He considered this for a moment. "A good foundation," he said. It was in these quiet moments that she saw glimpses of the man behind the chairman. He never spoke of his past, but she could see it in the profound loneliness in his eyes, in the way he held himself apart from the world. He had built an empire, but he lived in it alone. She recognized the architecture of a well-fortified solitude. It was a design she knew intimately. Meanwhile, Marcus was not going away quietly. His spectacular fall from grace had been the talk of the industry. He was professionally ruined. The architectural board had opened an ethics investigation. But his arrogance was a stubborn, malignant thing. He began a campaign of harassment. First, it was emails, long, rambling screeds that swung wildly between begging for forgiveness and threatening her with ruin. She forwarded them all to Jinwoo's legal team and never replied. Then came the phone calls from blocked numbers, his voice thick with alcohol and self-pity. She changed her number. He started leaving comments on her firm's social media posts, lies and accusations that were quickly deleted by her staff. He was a ghost rattling chains, a pathetic specter haunting the edges of her new life. Mina tried to ignore it, to focus on the future, but the past had a long shadow. She found herself looking over her shoulder when she left the office, her heart pounding at the sight of a man who looked vaguely like him. The freedom Jinwoo had given her felt fragile, conditional. One afternoon, Ms. Choi entered her office. Her expression was grim. "Miss An, you have been served." She handed Mina a thick envelope. It was a lawsuit. Marcus was suing her for intellectual property theft, claiming she had stolen his designs for the Helios Tower and was now profiting from them. It was an absurdity, a desperate, lunatic Hail Mary, but it was also a weapon. It would force her into depositions, into a public fight that would drag her name and his through the mud. It was his last, best attempt to pull her back into the filth with him. She felt a cold dread wash over her. She had been naive to think it was over. He would never let her go. He would burn his own life to the ground if it meant he could scorch hers in the process. She picked up her phone and called Jinwoo. "He's suing me," she said, her voice tight. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I see." His voice was colder than she had ever heard it. It was the sound of a glacier moving. "Don't worry, Mina. I will handle it." The word he used, handle, should have been comforting, but it sent a shiver down her spine. It was the word one used for a problem, an infestation, a thing to be eliminated. She realized then that Marcus, in his blind, stupid arrogance, had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was fighting her, the woman he had terrorized into silence for 7 years. He did not understand that he had just declared war on Kwon Jin-woo. A few days later, she was summoned to a meeting at the Daesung Group headquarters. When she entered the boardroom, she was surprised to see it was not just Jin-woo and his lawyers. Her own legal team was there, as was Marcus, looking thin and haggard, but with a familiar, defiant smirk on his face. His lawyer, a cheap, flashy man, sat beside him, shuffling papers. "Mina," Marcus said, as if they were old friends, "I'm glad you came to your senses. We can make all of this go away very simply. Sign over the firm, issue a public apology admitting your confusion, and I'll consider dropping the suit." Mina stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the man was almost impressive. He was a king ruling over a kingdom of ashes, still issuing decrees. "There will be no settlement, Marcus," she said, her voice even. His smirk faltered. "Don't be stupid, you can't win this. I have records, witnesses." "What you have," a calm voice interrupted, "is a great deal of misplaced confidence." Kwon Jin-woo entered the room from a private side door. He moved with his usual unhurried grace, taking a seat at the head of the massive table. He nodded to Mina, a silent gesture of support, before turning his full attention to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "I believe you have an inflated sense of your own position. Allow me to clarify it for you." He gestured to Ms. Choi, who stood by a large screen at the end of the room. She tapped a button on a tablet, and the screen came to life. It was a bank statement. Marcus's bank statement. It showed a staggering amount of debt. Mortgages, car loans, lines of credit, all in the red. "As of yesterday," Jin-woo continued, "the Daesung Group acquired a controlling interest in the financial institution that holds all of your outstanding debt, which means, in short, that you owe me a great deal of money, all of which is now due, immediately." Marcus's face went white. His lawyer started to sputter. "You can't just—" "I can," Jin-woo said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "And I have." He nodded to Ms. Choi again. The screen changed. It now showed a series of emails. Emails from Marcus to various investors, promising them returns based on the success of the Helios Tower, a project he no longer had any stake in. "This is wire fraud, Mr. Thorne. A federal offense. I have already forwarded these to the district attorney's office. They are very interested." The screen changed again. This time, it was a sworn affidavit from a junior architect at their old firm, detailing how Marcus had forced him to alter the metadata on the design files to erase Mina's name. And another, from their former accountant, detailing the funds Marcus had embezzled from the company accounts over the years. Jinwoo had not just prepared a defense. He had prepared an annihilation. He had built a case so thorough, so devastating, that it would not just ruin Marcus's lawsuit, it would erase him. Marcus was no longer smirking. He was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. "And finally," Jinwoo said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though it filled the silent room. He slid a thin file across the table. It stopped directly in front of Marcus. "This is the police report from 2 months ago, the one you paid the responding officer to lose. The night Miss An walked into a door. The officer has since had a change of heart and a change of employment. He was very forthcoming. Assault carries a prison sentence, Mr. Thorne." That was the final blow. The carefully constructed facade of Marcus Thorne shattered into a million pieces. The arrogant architect, the visionary, the genius, it all dissolved, leaving only a small, terrified man. He made a choking sound, a sob catching in his throat. He looked at Mina, his eyes swimming with tears. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of pure, abject terror. "Mina, please," he whimpered. "Tell him to stop. Please, I'll do anything." She looked at the man who had haunted her for 7 years, now utterly broken at a table of his own making. She felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet emptiness, the space where the fear used to be. "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and calm. It was a ghost of a command she had never been able to give before. He looked down at his own hands, as if surprised to find them empty. He wasn't touching her. He would never touch her again. The realization seemed to break him completely. He slumped in his chair, his body convulsing with sobs. He dropped his head into his hands, a pathetic, weeping ruin. His lawyer, looking sick, quietly began packing his briefcase. There was nothing left to defend. Jinwoo stood up. "Security will show you out, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice devoid of any triumph. It was the voice of a man closing a ledger. 2 guards entered the room and gently but firmly helped the sobbing Marcus to his feet and led him away. The room was silent again. Mina looked at Jinwoo. He had waged and won a war on her behalf. He had used his immense, terrifying power to give her back her life. "It's over," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of finality. "Yes," she whispered. "It's over." He walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. "The press conference for the Black Swan project is next week," he said, changing the subject as he always did, moving from demolition to construction without missing a beat. "I would like you to be there." "Of course," she said. "I'm the architect." He turned from the window to look at her. A real smile, small but genuine, touched his lips. "Yes, you are." The press conference was held in a stark white gallery overlooking the future site of the Black Swan project. The room was packed with journalists, city officials, and cultural philanthropists. Mina stood at the back of the room, content to be an observer. She had done the work. She didn't need the credit, not anymore. She knew her own worth. Kwon Jin-woo stood at the podium. He spoke about the project, about his vision for a new cultural heart for the city. He was a commanding presence, his quiet words holding the entire room captive. At the end of his speech, he said, "Vision is nothing without execution, and for that I have sought out the most talented architectural mind of her generation. Some of you may know her from her foundational work on the Helios Tower, but soon you will all know her for this." He looked out over the crowd, his eyes finding hers at the back of the room. "I would like to introduce the lead architect and my partner on the Black Swan project, the founder of the An Mina Collective, Miss An Mina." A spotlight found her. The room turned to look at her. A sea of faces, all looking at her. For a moment, the old fear flickered, the instinct to shrink, to become invisible. But then she met Jinwoo's gaze from across the room. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture that said, "It's your stage. Take it." She walked to the podium, her steps steady. The applause was a wave of sound, but it didn't intimidate her. She looked out at the city through the large window, at the skyline she knew so intimately. She saw the Helios Tower glinting in the afternoon sun. It was a part of her past, a scar that had become a landmark. And now, before her, was the empty waterfront, a blank page waiting for her to write the future. She spoke, her voice clear and strong. She didn't speak about her journey. She spoke about the work. She spoke about light and space and community. She spoke about building something that would last. Later, after the press had gone, she stood with Jinwoo on the gallery's balcony, overlooking the site. The wind from the water was cool on her face. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "You were good," he said. "I was telling the truth," she replied. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Mina, what Marcus did to you, it was not just a clerical error. It was a crime. I hope you know that." "I do," she said, and she realized it was true. The shame she had carried for so long was not hers. It was his. "Thank you, Jinwoo, for seeing me." "It was not difficult," he said. "Your work speaks very loudly." He reached out, not to touch her, but to hand her a thick roll of blueprints. It was the next phase of the project, a new set of problems to solve, a new world to build. She took them, their fingers brushing again. This time, the spark was not one of shock, but of recognition, a current flowing between 2 points that were finally, correctly aligned. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and filled them with light. "Well then," she said, unrolling the plans, "we should get to work." He stood beside her, looking not at the city, but at her, as she began to point out the challenges, her mind already racing, her voice filled with the quiet, confident passion of a creator in her element. He had given her a kingdom, and she was going to build it, one beautiful, honest line at a time. The past was a foundation, solid and unmoving beneath her feet. The future was an open space, waiting for its design. And for the first time, she was not afraid of the emptiness. She was excited to fill it. She was home.